The gravity of this moment is matched by the gravity of the threat that Iraq's weapons of mass destruction pose to the world. Let me now turn to those deadly weapons programs and describe why they are real and present dangers to the region and to the world. First, biological weapons. We have talked frequently here about biological weapons. By way of introduction and history, I think there are just three quick points I need to make. First, you will recall that it took UNSCOM 4 long and frustrating years to pry an admission out of Iraq that it had biological weapons. Second, when Iraq finally admitted having these weapons in 1995, the quantities were vast. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon.
Oh my God.
Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. This forced several hundred people to undergo emergency medical treatment and killed 2 postal workers just from an amount just about this quantity that was inside of an envelope. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax.
That's conflation.
But UNSCOM estimates that Saddam Hussein could have produced 25,000 liters. If concentrated into this dry form, this amount would be enough to fill tens upon tens of thousands of teaspoons. And Saddam Hussein has not verifiably accounted for even 1 teaspoonful of this deadly material.
It's because it didn't exist. Oh, hey everybody! Happy Monday. It's a mixed feeling that I have. You all know that General Secretary of State Colin Powell, who liked to be called General Colin Powell more than he liked to be called Secretary, has passed away. And even in death, it's complicated. And even in death, it's complicated because it was reported by his family on Facebook that he died from complications from COVID. And yes, he was fully vaccinated. So right there, the anti-vax crowd started to amplify that, started to say, see, vaccines don't work. But truly, Colin Powell died because Colin Powell was fighting a bunch of things. He had Parkinson's. Average lifespan of somebody with Parkinson's could be 18 to 20 years. But he had Parkinson's for quite some time. And he also had multiple myeloma, which is a blood cancer that affects the plasma cells. Your plasma cells are the cells in your blood that actually create antibodies, which your body would react to in a proper way after receiving a vaccine if you didn't have cancer of your plasma cells. The problem with the cancer of the plasma cells is exactly not being able to produce antibodies. So right there, the whole thing got twisted and complicated. And then, of course, there's my feelings. What about me, everybody? What about me? No, there are a lot of people's feelings. There are people who don't even know who Colin Powell is or that was. They don't know that he came from a very humble beginning, that he came from Jamaican immigrant parents. He was born in Harlem in New York, that he grew up in the South Bronx, that he did 2 tours in Vietnam, and that he wrote a biography called My American Journey, which I loved. I loved that book. I can't explain it to you. It just, for some reason, I loved it. I loved everything about his story. I loved everything about his background. I loved the way that he told the story in that book. I mean, I'm probably the only one in this audience that ever read it, but I loved it. And so I actually admired him a lot. And I knew that he had been the first national security advisor to Ronald Reagan. I knew, his Republican background and things like that. But what I never understood was in 2003 when he became Secretary of State for W. I mean, his father, H.W., made him Joint Chiefs. And then when the son wanted this war in Iraq, Colin Powell was Secretary of State. He had to go and make that presentation that I just showed you 2 minutes of at the United Nations to get the international community to come to war with us against what turned out to be an unarmed nation. And I knew that day when I was watching him do that with the little vial, and I knew that day, and I said so. The day this man passes, this will be part of his, right? And it is. I mean, it's just the day has now come, and of course, it is part of every single one of these, memorials to him. It includes how he did this. Now, that video is 20 years old, and it looks every minute of it. But 20 years later, but I will say that he did have regret about it. I don't know if that's good enough for you. I don't know if it's good enough for me. I mean, how do you feel about it? That's like the question. For those of you who remember him, for those of you who knew him, or his reputation of being, extremely professional and kind and strong, but humble and all of those things. He also went to the United Nations and told some really conflated I mean, that was so carefully worded that when you go and you look at it again all these many years later, and I looked at it, while it was happening and dissected it for you and said he was conflating a lot of things, making massive connections to things that weren't connected. And how did I know that? I knew that because we were able to talk to the UNSCOM director. We were able to talk to Scott Ritter, who told us there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that they had done inspections, and that in 1995, remember this speech that he gave at the UN, this was 2003. So in 1995, Scott Ritter said that Saddam Hussein had gotten rid of, he had turned over all of his weapons of mass destruction and was compliant with what the world told him to do. And that these weapons inspectors went in after, 2001, after, 9/11, and they were tasked with finding whether or not Saddam Hussein had centrifuges for nuclear weapons. That was the International Atomic Energy Agency. That was Hans Blick's group. And then Scott Ritter's group, UNSCOM, which just sounded as unfortunate as it was, found nothing. And they were screaming because they knew that we were going to war over nothing. And so I just knew the day would come when Colin Powell would, need to be remembered. And how could I include that portion of his life with the other portions of his life, which I actually admired? I don't know what to feel. I don't know what to think. I don't know. I could just tell you, I do know that he regretted it. I know that in 2008, he stopped being a Republican, which is what happened. I mean, listen, this is the best I can do for you to analyze what I think. I don't know how you feel about it, but it only hurt Colin Powell that he was a Republican for so long. It only hurt him because he publicly paid the price that every Republican who ever worked for W or ever worked for a Donald Trump should pay. And it only hurt him to pay that price because he had integrity, because underneath it all, he was a decent, humble person. But I think he viewed himself as a public servant first. And so he did what his president asked him to do. I don't know. I can't really tell you more about my feelings about this because I can't really sort through them all. But think about it this way. You think Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State under Donald Trump, is going to ever have personal integrity enough to say that he's sorry or he regrets working for Donald Trump or promoting bullcrap theories about North Korea or any any country, Syria, or abandoning the Kurds, you think? Don't have time to listen to the live show? Want to hear more on your schedule? Go to randyrhodes.com and buy a stinking podcast.